Hello again. I would like to continue with my VIII and Einstein series. If you remember from my former videos, we were speaking about the scientific and the spiritual interpretation of Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. The energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And I would like to elaborate a little bit more on the choice of c as the symbol for the speed of light. I said earlier that c was chosen because the speed of light was considered to be a constant speed. And this means that light itself could neither go faster nor slower than its clock speed of 186,000 miles per second, or 300,000 kilometers per second. And from 1905 until now, this is held very, very true. But in 2001, we are now in 2011, we have a different story. And at first, I thought the fact that we now have confirmed speeds of faster than the speed of light, I thought this fact would interfere with the information I wanted to give in this video. But I actually, after thinking about it, understood that it would assist and confirm what I'm going to talk to you about. You remember that I proposed that the symbol C stand for consciousness, because in our spiritual interpretation of Einstein's equation, we have E being enlightenment equals mass times speed consciousness squared. But we could also interpret the C as being the constant of consciousness. The type of consciousness I'm speaking of here, of course, is not the limited form of human consciousness. It is the constant of the consciousness that is. Now, this is the consciousness that is everywhere, that permeates all that is. The same concept of God, when God is a formless state and not a being or not a man or not anything else. This constant state of the consciousness that is simply is. Now, it is important also to understand that consciousness is not up in heaven. We all too often, because of the paradigm that we live in, seem to assume that everything like this is greater than we are. When we think of consciousness, and even I'm guilty of this, in presentation I raise my arm saying the consciousness that is, because we are so ingrained into thinking that it is greater. But consciousness is within us, and it is everything outside of us, as I explained earlier, confirmed now by quantum physics. And we are seen as moving through a kind of sea of consciousness, and not see the symbol, we're talking about sea, S-E-A, of consciousness. We are observing different forms, different condensed forms of this constant consciousness that is. These forms are simply ever more condensed versions of this constant. And it is all around, and it is within, and it is everywhere, permeating all. This is the consciousness that is. It's not something that is above or beyond us. It is surrounding us and in us. It is a part of us. We are part of this constant of consciousness, simply being expressed in a certain form at this particular moment in time. A moment, not in time, moment in our human consciousness. So going back to science as a constant speed of light, it is actually the concept of the speed of light that causes the trouble, because speed is a concept within the human realm. Speed is not of the constant. The constant is the potential of all speed. And so when we think of the C symbol being for the speed of light, I would like to substitute that with simply that the C stands for the constant of light. Light is the constant from which everything creates. And it is from where the statement comes that we humans are beings of light. Because in the constancy of the light of consciousness, we are beings of light. I would like to tie this into the Buddhist concept of permanence, because permanence is this constant state of the consciousness that is. It is the constant state of light. This is the permanent state that simply exists, that simply is. And it is the same thing as the waves of pure conscious potential that have been described by Dr. John Hagelin, the quantum physicist. It is in this permanence that it has the ability to create all that is. Everything collapses and condenses into being, into the impermanent state. And that impermanent state is this human realm. Everything all around within this impermanent state is still consciousness. And everything moves. Another quantum physicist named Dr. Amit Goswami describes it as everything in existence being simply movement of consciousness. So between the permanent state, moving to the impermanent state, going back to the permanent, and coming into the impermanent again, and back to the permanent, these are the cycles of consciousness that I've spoken about in my earlier videos. This is the state from going from the non-formed into the formed and back to the formed. These movements of consciousness is also how in this impermanent state and with our human consciousness, we are able with our imagination to create what we wish to experience. The imagination and the thoughts that create our reality are simply movements of this constant consciousness that is. These are simple transformations of energy coming from the ever-present constant of consciousness. Now, science says that everything comes from a void, and that from this void there was an explosion called the Big Bang, and everything began. But for me, I have trouble with the concept of a void, because a void is empty. A void is emptiness. And it is difficult for me to conceive of anything creating out of pure emptiness. But the permanent, constant state of consciousness is brimming full of potential awe. And from that, I can very easily create. We imagine, you and I, individually And we as a human essence imagine and create out of this constant consciousness that is. It is our individual consciousness creating our individual experience, and the collective consciousness of the human essence creating our human experience. From the pure, permanent, constant state of the full, everything is conceived and then brought into the impermanent state. So this concept of creation from the whole was very nicely explained in my first book called Lifting the Veil of Consciousness. And I would like to read this passage for you from the book. For those of you who have the books already, it's on page 135. The universe is vast, and it is consciousness everywhere, ripe and ready for conception. A concept is universal consciousness in conception. A concept is universal consciousness that has been conceived and been given birth by you. You are the creator of concepts and of birth and of all, man and woman alike. It is our veil of consciousness that separates our knowingness from this all of consciousness. It is the metaphorical veil that separates our consciousness from the all into the less than all. It is our veil of consciousness that separates the permanent state from the impermanent state that we experience as humans. It is the veil of consciousness that separates the one into the two, or into duality that is this human state. Science now says that everything in existence exhibits both wave-like and particle-like qualities, and they call this wave-particle duality. I would like to propose that wave-particle duality is the cycle of us going through part of the all of consciousness. It is the waves of pure conscious potential that are transforming into the particles of existence, which then transform back into the waves of pure conscious potential. It is the constant full of consciousness creating into the less than full. It is the particle that is the less than full that is still, however, part of these waves of consciousness. It is part of the constant of consciousness, because consciousness is something that we are never separated from. It only appears that we are separated because of this veil, because of our state of duality. But it is an appearance that is an illusion. This human state of separation is the duality phase of the constant of consciousness. And it is still part of the one of consciousness. It is the same as the God particle, which I discussed in one other video, where a God particle is less than the all of God, because God is the wave of pure conscious potential. It is the impermanence that is our present state that leads us to the Big Bang explosion of consciousness. This alternative theory of the Big Bang that I have been given in channeling and that I have explained in my former videos. This moment is when the impermanence transforms back into the permanent, constant state of life. Einstein was given this information with his E equals mc squared, but the spiritual side of this explanation, of this, the spiritual interpretation of this equation was largely unrecognized. And that is something that I will address in my next video. Thank you for listening.